Welcome, everybody. This is Football Talk. I am your host, and we're doing a special segment of Hot Talk on a bye-week Sunday morning. This is brought to you by Nasser Pilates Studio down here in beautiful Puerto Vallarta with a range of instructors with different backgrounds. You are bound to find the class for you. Let's go ahead and get rolling. We're going to start off with our game against Tampa Bay in Munich. Tampa Bay definitely came out with an amazing game plan and absolutely just shut the Seahawks down in the first half. The Hawks came out, really struggled to get any kind of push from either the offense or defensive lines. So Walker was basically a non-factor for most of the day. And I mean, you got to give it to Tampa Bay. They came prepared for that game. That being said, there still were some good takeaways. One of them was after a rocky start, had 5 penalties right away. They only had 1 penalty in the second half. After basically doing nothing in the first half, Geno ended up with a decent stat line. Walker really was never able to get going. He ended up with 10 attempts for 17 total yards. So again, credit to Tampa Bay for really just winning the day in the trenches. Seattle still had a chance to win that game, so it wasn't a total loss, but there was definitely some things to keep up, which is nice since they're going into the bye week. There's some things that they can, really spend some time watching tape, adjust. I don't know that anybody necessarily got the blueprint from this game of how to shut it down. It's pretty obvious if you can shut the run game down, it hurts any team that uses a run game. So that's not exactly a mystery that was solved. But one thing that was probably the best takeaway is at the end of the game, they needed to come back, and Geno was able to do that primarily, through the air. The run game wasn't a factor, so he was able to throw the ball around the yard, ended up with 275 yards and a couple of touchdowns. So he was able to help bring Seattle back. And outside of our defense not being able to get off the field on third down with 2.5 minutes left, they could have completed that comeback. Obviously, the game may have been different if Geno doesn't fumble that ball. But, at the end of the day, he was able to bring them back, was a defensive stop away from, overcoming that adversity. So I don't really see that as that big of a deal. Turnovers happen. It's, how you respond after one. And it's not like there was a ton of turnovers during the game or anything. It was a fumble and that was it. So it really wasn't detrimental. Both teams ended up with turnovers anyway. So it was good to see that fourth quarter comeback. It shows an element of Geno that we haven't really been able to see yet on whether or not he could bring a team back from behind. And although they weren't able to complete it, that wasn't really the offense's fault in that way. They were able to score on a couple of drives back to back. And then it just came down to the defense not being able to get a stop on third down. They had a couple of chances on third down, or a couple of third down chances. So that is mostly unfortunate, couldn't get a stop that ultimately led to, the loss. But overall, it ended up being a pretty solid game. Second half was fun to watch. First half was pretty rough, but we got a lot of questions. Some of these came from Facebook, some from Instagram, obviously some from Twitter, and some that were just questions that were dropped on some of our other videos. Any of those are acceptable ways to send questions each week, and we try and answer as many of them as possible. So let's go ahead and get rolling here. So the first one is, if they don't draft a quarterback, do they trade down? Do they trade up? Just take their pick? So some of that comes down to what it is Geno probably wants, as far as what his contract might look like. If he wants north of 30 million, I would bet they probably draft a quarterback and then let Geno, test out the free agency market. If he if he's right around 30 and it's incentive based, I think he stays. If he is, mostly guaranteed, but down around 25, maybe 27, I still think they bring him back. So it's really going to come down to what it is he thinks he can command as far as that contract is laid out. But if we're going with he is staying and we don't draft, I think that we still take our pick, but not our pick. I think we take Denver's pick. I think right now would be the 7th overall pick. And if that's the case, then I believe we would get an edge rusher, maybe like a Miles Murphy out of Clemson or Will Anderson out of Alabama, depending on where they slide and, obviously where the pick ends up to. We're going into, week 11 here. So we still got some time left to see those picks kind of move up and down and, where players are starting to evolve on the draft board. The other thing is you might get a interior D-line like a Brian Breesy, but it's probably going to be a D-line, maybe a linebacker. But I think we take the Denver pick, and then with Seattle's pick, which right now I believe is 14th. If that's the case, then they may trade down out of that, get a couple of second rounders. I don't think, just based on Seahawk history, I don't think they end up selecting 2 first rounders unless there's somebody really solid still on the board that, sometimes you just select the best talent on the board. And so there's obviously the outside chance that they use both picks, but I would think that first pick is probably going to end up being, if they keep Geno, it'll probably end up being an edge rusher or, interior D line, just because at the end of the day, their run defense really isn't very good, which was obviously outlined by Fournette having his biggest day of the year after, Tampa was only able to rush for roughly 61 yards a game prior to that. So I would bet that they probably spend some draft capital to help shore up that defensive line. That'll also free up some of the linebackers to be able to stay back in coverage, and maybe they don't get tore up so bad on seam routes from tight ends and, little crossing routes, stuff like that. So that's kind of the way I see that working out. All right. So how legit is Walker long-term? Who's his career comp? So, that's tough, right? How legit is Walker? I mean, the kid is a talent for sure. He runs hard. He makes smart decisions. He's able to break tackles. As far as a comp, I don't know that we have enough film on him yet to give you a good, to give you a comp that would be accurate, right? Because we're halfway through the season, and there's been games where it's been amazing. He's had huge pops, and then there's been, some where it hasn't been as great. So I feel like we probably need a few more games to kind of average some of those numbers out a little bit more so that we can get an accurate comp. So this is a question that I'll end up coming back to probably here in a couple of weeks, just to see, especially how much that line got shut down this last week. It'll be interesting to see how they respond going in against the Raiders next week, just so that we can see exactly what this arc for Walker really is going to be. So that's a question that we'll end up coming back to. But as it sits right now, tough to say. All right. Do we use the picks to go after Lamar? If we do, fully guaranteed 3-year, 150, 170 mil. So no, that's actually been asked a couple of different ways. I don't see them going after Lamar. I don't think that that's really the direction that this offense is trying to go. Obviously, Lamar is an amazing talent. His ability to throw the ball has really evolved over the years, and he's still fast and elusive, but I don't really think that's the direction that Seattle appears to be going for. So, I mean, it would be fun to watch. It would be a fun to watch team if they went and got Lamar, but I don't really see that being a true option. But I have to imagine that the Ravens end up getting a deal together. I'd be surprised if they end up franchise tagging him and, I mean, creating a weird scenario. I think at some point the Ravens are going to cave and give Lamar exactly what he's looking for. Do I think Geno gets more MVP votes than Wilson has had in his career? So Wilson's had one vote. It's entirely possible that Geno ends up stealing a couple of votes. He's still not a legitimate MVP winner, but he just doesn't have the stats behind it. They're winning games, and he's played exceptionally well, and his QBR is awesome. I mean, so he's playing really efficient ball, but the MVPs are always, leading in yardage and, touchdowns and stuff like that. And of course, he's not going to be leading touchdowns because they run the ball so much. So, and similarly, he's not going to be leading the pack in pass yardage just because, again, they run the ball so effectively. But do I think he could get 2 votes? Yeah, I mean, I think he could get 2 votes. So let's see what else we got. What would I like to see out of the bye? Man, a lot of things, especially after last week. There's some real questions on why they didn't get any push from either line. Could it be an aberration? Could it be that they were tired, jet lagged? I know a lot of these guys were young. It's their first time out of the country. All of those things could be true. So probably out of the bye, just getting guys healthy and getting a good game plan to go up against the Raiders, I think is really the biggest thing to get out of it. I don't know that there's much they can do scheme-wise to get a ton better against the run. It's not like we're adding players. And I think we've pretty much seen what the guys we have can do. So can they do some wrinkles with the scheme to maybe create some better opportunities? Possibly, but they have been able to get back there and get sacks. So it's not like they get no penetration, but against the run game, they definitely struggle. So if there's anything that they can address in that way, that would be good. Obviously, we're not really going to know against the Raiders, when they go to play them, just because the Raiders are seemingly bad at everything at this point. And then after watching Carr, struggling on camera after the last game. And, I think the disappointing part about that is it's not even like he was calling out coaches. He was calling out fellow players, which means that locker room is starting to fall apart. So this is a game that you may not necessarily see what the improvements are from the Seahawks against them, just because I don't know that they're even going to put a cohesive team on the field next week. So that'll be something you'll just kind of have to monitor over the coming weeks, since that game, who knows what that's going to look like. If Pete retires after this season, do we get Sean Payton? Neither one of those things are an actual option. Sean Payton is probably going to come back to coaching next year. I know he has expressed interest in doing that. Seattle is probably not a real option. And Pete still has a couple of years on his contract. And as well as they're playing this year, I can't imagine that he's just like, I'm out. I would imagine that he's here to finish up his contract. So I don't think any of that's a real option, but it would be interesting, to say the least. When does Jody Allen try to sell the team? So that group's expressed interest in selling the team. They didn't put any kind of timeline on it. So I would imagine that that's probably about, I don't know, 3 or 4 years down the road would be my guess. They're probably also waiting to see where some of these, contracts end up going, especially like the new TV contract. They may hang out for the next one, which, this one that they signed recently, blockbuster deal, but the next one definitely has some interesting elements that could happen to it because they're talking about a possible expansion. And if they're going to do an expansion, it would be around the time of TV contracts because it's easier to negotiate those up higher when now you have a couple more teams to add to the mix, especially if they're going to legitimately look at adding a European team or two, depending on, how it is that comes together. But, so if they do that, that's probably about the time that they would be looking to sell because it would be a record breaking deal. The league would be getting bigger and that would make the team worth the most it's ever been, just because there'd be excitement around the league. And so that would create, another buying opportunity with the carrot of the huge TV contract that's going to bring money in. So I figure you're probably still, 5 years away or so before anybody is legitimately trying to get rid of the Hawks. So what do I think about Aaron Rodgers wearing the Lynch jersey? I'm guessing people forgot that they were teammates at Cal. This is really a non-story. I was just being, respectful of his friend. So I don't really read anything into that story, but man, people sure played it up for some reason. And it probably is what led into this next thing is, Colin Cowherd said that, we should pick Aaron Rodgers up. 100% should not do that. One, you don't know if Rodgers is going to retire in any given year, and his attitude, he wouldn't be a great fit for the culture of the Seahawks. I find it hilarious that Colin was saying that would be a good fit. I mean, talent-wise, yeah, Rodgers is, Rodgers, despite the fact that they're having a rough season over in Green Bay currently. But yeah, man, personality-wise, I don't see that being a fit at all. So one, I don't read anything into him wearing a jersey that, again, was for his friend that he went to college with. And should the Hawks pick him up? Absolutely not. That makes no sense to me at all. All right. So let's see. They started throwing to tight ends. And so the Tampa Bay would stop stacking the line, but then they didn't get away from it and start running the ball again. Is that Waldron's fault or Gino's fault calling audibles? So neither really. The throws to the tight ends were just about the only thing that were getting the offense going, or little dump passes for the most part. So that wasn't really necessarily a play calling issue or audibling out of runs. You got to remember they were completely stuffed in the first half, and then real soon into the second half, they were down 21-3. And at that point, running the ball becomes a lot more difficult. If you're down by 2 scores, you're pretty much still, able to run most of your playbook, and you can still, really dive into the run game. Once you're down 3 scores, your run game is pretty much done because now you're playing catch up. And so I get where the question is coming from, but at the end of the day, once you're down 3 scores, like your running game is no longer an option because you got to be able to push the field, especially when you're already halfway through the third quarter. I mean, you just don't have enough time left to burn a bunch of that up running the ball. All of a sudden, your playbook becomes very wide open. Like you're stretching the field, or at least your shorter routes. You're trying to get closer to areas where they're either first downs each time, or you're over by the sidelines. Try and stop the clock. Try and preserve as much time as possible because 3 scores, especially as you were getting close to the fourth quarter, man, that's tough to overcome. So that's why they didn't really go back to the run. It's not that they were abandoning who they were trying to be as a team. It's the situationally, you can't do it. Not if you're going to try and climb back into a game. What do I think about the report that Russ called Seahawks audible and the team didn't know what it was he was talking about? And then there's a second part to that is, what do I think about him wearing the wristband to the presser? So I did see that story, and that was actually reported by a Denver radio show. So I don't know if it's true or not. If it is true, I mean, the dude got sacked 5 times and hit 20 during that game. I could absolutely see being rattled and accidentally calling a audible from a team you were on for a decade. Like, if you've been getting beat up and you're just kind of out of your mind a little bit, yeah, I could see that happening. I don't know that it's him, failing as a human or anything. I mean, if you get beat up enough, you're gonna make some mistakes. You're gonna end up doing some little things that don't make sense or are laughable or whatever. So I don't really hold it too much against him. I mean, at the end of the day, he's played 10 games in Denver and he played for 10 years in Seattle. So having something like that, if you're getting rattled, come out, yeah, I could see that happening. Now, if it's a repeated thing or, a continuous, then there's some real problems, but I don't really foresee that being what happened there. But if it did happen, it is funny. I'll give it that. And then the wristband, the wristband to the presser. I don't know if that was designed to be a dig or not, but if it was trying to be a dig, I mean, funny timing because they didn't win the game. So I don't know if it was just he wore it during the game and he likes to show up to the presser wearing what he was wearing because he always shows up in his pads and everything. And if he was wearing it during the game, then, you just leave it on, whatever. But if it was, look, I lost a game with it. I mean, I don't know. I don't really know what you're trying to prove there. So again, I just find those things laughable at this point. They're kind of non-stories that, I'm just going with the fan base has to be a little bit bored if that's what we're focusing on. Let's see. In the first half, why didn't they move away from the run sooner? Well, I mean, you can't. You don't want to become one-dimensional until it's required, right? So they didn't really become just pass heavy until halfway through the third quarter. And, again, you're down by 3 scores. You gotta do that at that point. But just because the run game isn't necessarily working initially, you can't really get away from it because you need the other team to respect the run. Because it also allows you to run more of your playbook. So even if there's stuff in the run, if you're continuing to go after it, it keeps guys honest. They have to be, they have to be around the line of scrimmage. You can't have linebackers floating back into coverage because there is always the threat that you're going to run. Plus, it allows you to be able to use some of the, the RPOs and play action. And so if you just abandon the run, none of those plays work. So it makes sense that they didn't get away from it sooner. But once they did get away from it, I mean, there was no other option. They had to get away from it at that point because well, down by 3 scores. I mean, you just got to throw the ball around the yard and try and get back in the game. Let's see. So here's one that came from one of the Facebook groups. So Sean Alexander was put in the Ring of Honor. What do I think about that? So Sean Alexander to me is, I feel like he's an overrated running back because at the time, the Seahawks had the best left side of the line ever assembled, right? You had Big Walt, and you had Hutch, and you had Max Strong as your fullback leading the way. Some of the gaps that Alexander was able to run through, anybody could have ran through. So I feel like he had a lot of hype to him that wasn't necessarily justified. Don't get me wrong, he was a fantastic back. He was really fast. He didn't like to get hit though, so it's a good thing that they would open up holes that you could drive a tank through. But in plays that he wasn't on the field, if you remember, we had Maurice Morris back there, and he ran for big days behind that line too, because again, nobody was touching you until it was the secondary anyway. So of course, he's going to put up a ton of yards. It got him an MVP. All of those things are awesome, but I mean, at the end of the day, that line is really what produced that. It's not like Sean Alexander was, a Barry Sanders kind of guy where his line was letting guys through and his first 5 guys missing were all behind the line of scrimmage. So it's not like he was that level of talent. But he was fast. And, once he was towards the secondary, he could absolutely make you miss. But the only time he really ran hard is close to the end zone. Like he wanted to score. But if you were in the middle of the field, I mean, he's going to stretch the field to the edge and run out of bounds. If the hole isn't there. He was never the, lower the head, hit the guy and, get a couple of yards. That just wasn't his style of play. So I always felt that Sean Alexander was a little bit overrated, but at the end of the day, he did put up a ton of stats, a lot of touchdowns, and won that MVP. So I understand why he's in the ring, but I don't hold him in quite the same esteem that a lot of Seahawk fans do. So now, since it's the bye week, we take a look forward to next week going against the Raiders. Again, it's just not a very good team. So, and they're playing really bad. There's obviously some division happening in the locker room. I would also start to think that because they're probably going to give McDaniels another year, there's a real chance that this could be Carr's last season with the Raiders. So there's just a lot of turmoil in that locker room. So I would think that this is going to be a game that Seattle can pretty handily win. I mean, obviously they can't overlook them. Definitely don't want to make it become a trap game, but it's a game that, from what we've seen on the field so far, Seattle absolutely should win this game. But yeah, I mean, that's more or less the thing. I definitely look for our offensive line getting back to what they were doing before the Tampa game, where they were giving Walker nice rushing lanes to get through. Obviously, you're going to see more of the same from Geno. He's playing really efficient, smart football. He's not trying to do too much, but he does take shots downfield when they're open. So it's not like he's doing nothing but little outlet passes and dumps to the sideline and, stuff like that. Like he's playing smart football. So that's more or less what I'm looking for coming to the Raiders. We're going to do one more of these before that Raiders game anyway, at the standard, Thursday morning time slot. But since it was the bye week, I wanted to do one where it was a little bit of Seahawks on a Sunday when the Hawks have it off. So other than that, enjoy all the games today. And subscribe. Let me know any questions you have for next week. Have a good day, guys.